Hi everyone, I'm Layla, and I'm about to tell you all about the history of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or the FDA. Yes, very boring sounding, I know, but I promise I've worked my hardest to ensure your entertainment. At least I hope so. So first, let me tell you something about myself. I love history. Always have, always will. When I was little, I loved curling up with a good old Magic Tree House by Mary Pope Osborne and immersing myself in the awesome time travel. I'm sure some of you share my sentiment. I just couldn't get over the fact that Jack and Annie got to experience life back then. And as I grew up, learning about the past only continued. One of the history paths I eventually ended up on was all about the FDA. Well, more so the regulations throughout the years. Like, how come we needed to make those? What prompted them? Who brought them about? And I, teacher and fellow classmates, have found the answers to these questions. Firstly, let's begin with how bad the state of food and other consumer products were before the FDA. It's the 1800s, you're eating your breakfast. Unknown to you, in your coffee mix there was clay and floor sweepings added. The bread you've toasted was made with rotten eggs that were deodorized to hide the smell. The baker goes through about 1,000 pounds of those bad eggs each day. And now you decide you'd like some grape jelly on your toast. You put it on. It's not grape jelly though, it's actually just scraps of apples and coal tar. You weren't aware you were eating these things though because the chemicals in them hid smells and colorings that would have told you something was off with your meal. In fact, this dilemma was so common that one Harvard graduate ended up dedicating himself to stopping it. His name? Dr. Harvey Washington Wiley. Dr. Wiley was the chief chemist of the Bureau of Chemistry in the early 20th century. The Bureau of Chemistry, which I'm just going to refer to as the Bureau, was a federal agency which at the time pretty much just did the FDA's job. In 1902, Congress gave the branch funding for research into harmful ingredients in food, and Wiley designed many of the experiments they conducted. Over many years, the Bureau worked to figure out what was safe and unsafe for us to consume. And they did so in the only way they could really figure out how, by feeding stuff to people. Volunteers were given food that typically were used as preservatives at the time, like borax, salicylic acid, sulfurous acid, copper sulfate, and even more really harmful things. The conclusion the experimenters would find is really obvious to us now. Those chemicals, preservatives, and colorings were just awful for us to consume. Once the work Wiley led was complete, Americans had already been hearing about the experiments and they wanted to change the food industry. The reformers were missing something very important though, some political support. That's where a very important book comes into play, The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. It came out in 1906, exposing the meatpacking industry. Its contents disgusted many, including the US president at the time, Teddy Roosevelt, who became invested in fixing the disgusting practices many, including himself, had been victim to. Now with someone like Roosevelt fighting for them, reformers were able to finally get something passed. In 1906, the Food and Drugs Act and the Meat Inspection Act were signed into law, which pretty much labeled ingredients on food, banned certain foods, and made sure companies could be prosecuted for endangering people. Now, of course, these regulations were helpful. I'm not about to say they weren't, but two huge product sectors were ignored: drugs and cosmetics. I have a few examples for you. In 1912, a medicine marketed to babies called Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup guaranteed to soothe feisty children. It did do that, and very well so, but because it contained not only alcohol, but morphine. Yes, both of those ingredients. The product ended up killing many children due to there being no check on it. And in the beauty industry, products were sold radium-laced. Radium was in face creams, soaps, rouges, and compact powders. Guess what the effects of radium are? I'll tell you, the development of various cancers, anemia, cataracts, broken teeth, and/or reduced bone growth. Even death. Yet nothing about things like this being sold was really done until 1938, when another drug disaster ended up killing many kids when a medicine contained antifreeze as one of its main ingredients. And so, in 1938, the FDA, which by this time had separated from the Bureau by the way, realized the 1906 Act simply could not do enough to protect people. So, of course, another law was passed to replace the old one, the 1938 Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which is still in effect today, with some amendments, of course. Now the answer to the question of why we need the FDA is clear. Without it, we kept poisoning ourselves. But there's another thing I'd like you to remember from this video, Dr. Wiley. Because without his work, the push for product regulation may have come much later in this country. Wiley provided a foundation to build safer food, drugs, and cosmetics throughout America. He helps to keep us from being poisoned daily, yet most people still haven't heard his name, and that's just not right. So on behalf of all of us, thanks Dr. Wiley.